Okay, so let's start. I'm Piotr Sarnacki, and today I will talk about Rails free mountable applications. And let's start with explanation what are mountable applications. And I would say that mountable applications are applications that can be mounted inside other apps. So maybe let's start with a little story. Your client comes in and he says that he wants a blog, and this blog should be integrated with your application. When users are logged in, they can comment as with their normal accounts, and you should be able to display a few last posts on the main page. And you say blog, it's easy, right? You can write it in 15 minutes. We all saw this famous video about creating weblog in Rails in 15 minutes by DHH. But I would say that it will take much more time, 16 minutes, because hopefully your application has tests, and you also want to write tests for the blog, and maybe you want some comments moderation, or for example file uploads, or other things that are probably useful when you have a blog. So the other approach is to take something existing, but if it's standalone application, it will be always hard to integrate it. So if you want to, for example, have the same users for both your application and blog, you will have to somehow synchronize your application and the blog. So it will be always hard. And you should always ask yourself, is that thing that you are building the core of your business? So if you are building, for example, a social network, and you just need a blog to display on the main page a few last posts, it's not core of your business, and you probably should not waste much time writing it. And there are many more examples when you can profit from reusing existing applications and integrate them in your application. Like, for example, do you need to always write simple CMS for handling a few static pages, or add forum by adding some controllers to your application, or file manager, or single sign-on, or billing, or any other type of application that can be integrated? Okay, so that's nice. Nice idea, and it's not new. Guys from Rails Core thought about it for a long time. But how can we do this in Rails? And I would like to tell a bit of history of mountable applications in Rails. So about 2 years ago, Rails and MERB core teams announced merge of those two frameworks. And the first release candidate was planned to RailsConf 2009, and mountable applications were planned for 3.0. But unfortunately, these plans were a bit too optimistic, and we have 3.0 after 2 years, not 1 year, and we don't have mountable applications in 3.0. But during this summer, Ruby Summer of Code was organized, and it was community effort over many companies, many various Ruby companies raised about $100,000 to fund 20 projects. And one of the projects was Rails free mountable applications, and here I am. I was the guy writing it, and I must say that it was So it was really wonderful experience. I think that it was one of the best experiences in my programming life. And I was working with Yehuda Ketz and Joseph Valim, who unfortunately can't be here, but he helped me a lot. And current status, the question about current status is, of course, are we there? And I can say that yes, we can do it, but in the same time I can say that no, it's not finished. because the goal of it was to run two Rails applications in one process. And unfortunately, it's a bit hard. For example, when you have two applications, you need to configure them, and if two applications have the same configuration options, same configurations but other values, there is a conflict, and you also have middleware stacks in your applications, and some of the middlewares can be run only once. For example, you should not run session middleware twice, or cookies middleware twice, or other things like that. So you would have to disable some of those middlewares for the mounted application. And the third thing is that when you have two applications, or even more applications, you actually don't know which one is the last. If you, for example, load blog application as dependency, then you load, for example, social network, and you can't easily say that it's the last one, or is it just a dependency for the third application. And these problems are of course solvable. We could do that, but we don't know if it's really needed. Because designing an application to be both standalone and mountable, so you can run it, deploy it on server, or mount it into another application, is a bit hard, because you need to, for example, do some decisions for mountable applications, some other decisions for standalone, and choosing only one way is better, is much easier way to go. So instead of full entire Rails applications mountable in other ones, we have engines, and you probably think that engines are not so good for that, but before my work, engines were a bit more powerful than plugins. And right now, in Rails 3.1, actually in Edge Rails, they are almost as powerful as application. So the only thing that is different between engine and application right now is that application can be run standalone and engine must be mounted. So the question is, do we plan to make these entire applications mountable? And the answer is that it's up to you. Because I don't see much profit in making it reality, but if you can find use cases where you can't easily, for example, mount that engine inside application and run it mounted, we can discuss that, and we can talk about it, and if you think that it's valuable for you, we can consider that option. But for me, right now, we can call engines mountable applications, and we can easily use it to reuse entire applications like blogs and so on. So engines were extended by adding roads to them. This is a very important part of application. And we also added a middleware stack, so we can have the same things as in application. And also you can add plugins to engines. Of course, before you didn't have two applications running in one process. So right now we have some new APIs that make it we have the new APIs that can help you communicating between those applications. So all the codes that I will show now are available only in GitHub in Edge version of Rails, not in stable one, and they will be available in stable version as soon as 3.1 comes in. So those new APIs are of course used for mounting engines and communicating between them. So the first and most important thing, I think, is mounting an engine. So here you can see that there's a router from application, and inside that router I used mount block engine at /block. So now this block engine is mounted at /block path. So for example, if you want to get to post controller, you just say address /block/posts. And the next important thing is isolating engine, because till now engines were a part of application. When you have engine with a few controllers and models and helpers, it was behaving like you would just copy them inside your application. And for some engines it's okay. For example, like device, it's a part of application, it's login system. But if you have a blog or forum, it should not probably be shared with applications. So you can isolate an engine inside a namespace. So the important thing here is that you need a namespace to actually make isolated engine, and you can do it with that method isolate namespace. And we need namespace for two crucial things. First thing is conflicts. If you have two comments model, for example, in application and in engine, it will you will have two classes with the same name, so it will so you will have conflict and probably some weird errors. And the other thing, very important, is that you need a way to say that, for example, model is from engine. So you can so we can do some tweaks to make the communication easier. So I will now show, for example, here is a model that is inside namespace blog. You can see module blog and class post. And now when we say this blog post new, we can see that we can say that this model will be from engine, not from application. So effects of isolation are, the first thing is that normally when you have controller like that inside namespace block, it will get all applications helpers anyway. This namespace will not change anything. And now when you have isolated engine, it will get just the helpers of the engine, so it will be isolated. The next thing are routes. If you have all the controllers namespaced with, for example, blog, so you have like blog post controller, you would have to add that scope that's commented here. And in isolated engine, you can just omit it, it's added implicitly. The next thing that I wanted to make simpler is naming. When you have blog post model, normally you would have, it would be named blog underscore post after changing it to name for example, names and IDs. And with isolated engine, we know that inside that engine every models are namespaced. So we can, so instead of doing this like the name is blog post and consequently params blog post, it's just post. So if you do in isolated engine something like that, you will get just post without blog prefix. There is also a problem with in normal engines with prefix with prefix in URL helpers. And as you can see in the shared engine, this is blog underscore post underscore path. And in isolated engine, it will be just post path. So you don't have to write this blog prefix in every freaking place in your application. Last thing that changes after isolated engine is are generators. So when you generate this model post, it will automatically add namespace, and it will automatically change table name to blog underscore posts instead of just posts, to avoid conflicts in database. So this will generate model like that. It will add namespace automatically. And good question is when to isolate. And I would say that you should isolate engine every time you need to have separate mountable application. In all other cases, you should go with defaults and you should make engine like before. But if you have, for example, blog or forum, you should go with isolate. It will be much easier to make that application. and you can then treat that engine as a separate entire application. So since you can have more than one router, you will probably want to use routes from other applications. So for example, here we have a blog post controller, and I can use post path normally as I would do in any application. But if I want to use path from main application, I need to do something special, and this is this helper main app, which gives us access to all applications paths. So I can say main app root path, and it will generate root path for application. And the other way around, it works quite the same. Here we have full controller, it's from application, it's not namespaced. And we can use this application's URL as normally, but if I want to get blog's URL, I need to use this special helper blog. And you probably would ask why from where this name comes from, and it comes obviously from namespace. If namespace is blog, it will be just blog. But in case it can make conflicts in your application, you can of course change that, and you can say that you want blog engine as, for example, shiny blog. And now we can use shinyblog.postpath in your application, and it will generate a URL for blog. The next thing is that you can use that special URL in polymorphic URL. It's used mainly in Form 4. So if you want to make a form that points to blog inside your application, you can just put it as a first argument, as you would normally do. For example, if you have admin namespace, you would put here symbol admin. So you just do something similar, but instead of the symbol, you use blog helper. The chances are that when you have engine as a separated application, it will have its own assets. So in development, it will work. It will work automatically, but in production, you have to do one of two things. You can either configure application to serve static assets with action dispatch static middleware, or you can copy all the assets to application. And which way to choose, it depends on your setup, because if you have some HTTP cache between your application users, you probably can go with the first way. But if you don't have anything to cache that calls, you would probably want to just copy files to not hit application every time someone have to download a static file. Also, in engines you could probably use migrations. So if you want to copy them to application, you can just run rake blog install migrations, or you can do both things, copy assets and migrations, by using the shortcut rake blog install. And as you now know how new APIs look like, you probably want to make a new engine and use it. So the easiest way to do it right now is to use Nginx. It's a gem by Joseph Valium, and it will generate, if you say Nginx blog, it will generate a skeleton for any Rails plugin or extension. So if it's for any extensions, we can also use it for engines. So you can change directory to blog. You can add lib blog engine.rb, and then you can add your engine definition. Here we have blog engine with isolated in namespace blog, as I showed you before. And now you can just, for example, run script trails, generate model post, and it will generate model as in normal application. As some of you may think right now how to use that engine if it must be run mounted in some other application. So Nginx makes the simplest possible thing. So it creates dummy application in test/dummy. So you can use that application to, for example, run server or run console with mounted engine, and you can run tests against it. So all the tests that you will make will be run inside that application. And at the end of this presentation, I want to talk about evil parts of engines. And probably some of you could hear that components are evil. And I would say that this is not particularly true in general, and it depends on how do you use components. And clearly, we can call engines components, just these high-level components. So, when not to use engines? I think that if you want to use engines to solve every problem, you will fail. Engines are not a silver bullet, and if you want to make some highly customizable, flexible engines that will work for everyone, you will probably just waste your time. And you should think of it as just generic application that you would use normally, not as something that you can plug into every application out there and customize with a few switches to work in some weird way. So my work on APIs are pretty much finished, but there's some things to do, and we need to battle test APIs in real apps. So I would like everybody to, if you have a need to make some application integrated in another application, I encourage to grab the code of Edge Rails from GitHub and try it out. I will also make some tutorials shortly, so you will probably you can probably find you will be able to find it on Edge on Rails guides probably. And we need to set standards when you will start developing engines. You will probably need something like authorization, authentication, and extensions, and so on. And for example, what I mean by standards. Right now, in pretty much every application, you use current user helper that returns currently logged user. And I think that it would be good to have such standards for some other parts of applications. And then the chances that when you mount mountable application inside another one and it fails are really low. So you will have one common API to do that. And I would like to hear your feedback. What do you think about that? We can, if you have some ideas, we can discuss it. Some future requests, or if you think that it's stupid or that something is done wrong, you can contact me on Twitter, GitHub, and Gmail, and pretty much every other service that I use with Drogo's nickname. Or you can catch me here on after presentation, so we can talk. So thank you.
Thank you, Piotr. If you have any questions, please up your hands.
Hi, Piotr. My name is Artur Pirogovsky. And I have a question. Why did you choose to mount applications instead of going with server-oriented architecture and just mounting, I mean, with active resource via HTTP protocol? Like, you can have different applications, totally different servers, and integrate them this way.
Yes, you can do that, but then you don't have this low-level API. You can just operate on resources. And I think that for some situations it's okay. There is many services use APIs, for example, from Google, like Google Maps and stuff like that. And it's basically okay, but it's a bit slower than than application mounted in another one, because it needs to contact another server or another application. Even if it's on the same server, it's communicating not on the Ruby level, on the code level, but it's communicating on HTTP level. So I think that it's okay for some situations, but for example, if you want to have just simple CMS with a few static pages, or I don't know, or some billing system that allows you to pay for your subscriptions, it would be weird to communicate with those applications by some kind of API. If you can just mount it inside the application and use it directly.
Yeah, thank you. And how are you going to solve versioning issues? For example, your application is stuck with some version of Rails, and engine is stuck with another version of Rails. How can you integrate them?
If you have engine application in other versions, I think that you can't do anything. API now is not changing so much. We are just adding some new API, but this API that you currently use will be backwards compatible till for sure till 4.0. So I think it will not be common case that you can't migrate your application to some higher level of framework. But if you have that problem, you probably can't use engine with other version of Rails than use your application.
Yeah, thank you. And the last question is, how are you going to solve integration issues? For example, your engine uses some plugins of specific versions, and your Rails application uses the same plugins of different versions. How the namespace conflicts will be solved? Thank you.
So, if these are gem plugins, it's basically a problem of resolving dependencies, and it will be done with bundler. And if these are these normal plugins in vendor/plugins, you basically it will be hard. So that's why vendor plugins will be deprecated in probably 3.2 or 4.0, and people are strongly encouraged to use gem plugins and to resolve dependencies easier.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Korsky. As engine is a separate application, is it possible to run it on another hardware, or how the performance issues are solved?
So you can, for example, run, I don't know, like a few instances with engine installed and a few instances with engine not installed. For example, if you have some admin area, you could possibly run it only for a few instances, because obviously you don't need admin area for every user. But it's a part of your application, so you should basically run it inside the application, so in the same server that this instance runs. So I don't know if I correctly understood your question. Does it seem like answer for it, or?
Yeah, it seems. But also, if an engine is a separate application, and could it be run on another hardware? Is it possible?
Like I said, you just run it on one instance, so it's not meant to be integrated and run on two servers. It's meant to load the dependency as a gem, as a gem for application, and run in one instance. So it's like that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Maybe I've missed some part. Yes, I'm here. Maybe I've missed some part of your lecture. So I just want to know, how do you handle the situations when your engine, when you need to overload database structure of your engine? What are the best practices? Have I missed it? What is the lecture?
So the best practices are still in. We must develop best practices, because obviously it's new thing for Rails. So we don't know actually what will be the best practices. But right now, as for migrations, there is a task to copy all the migrations to your application, and then you can, for example, customize it if they don't fit your needs. And other than that, I don't know. It's after we will have many more engines, we will probably see some I don't know, practices and standards for that.
I'm eager. How difficult is to build a set of components, standard components for every web application, like forum, like blog? Is it difficult to migrate the existing ones which are developed for a couple of years already?
You obviously will need to change some things in current applications, because if they are designed to be run standalone, some parts obviously will not work. But from the API point of view, the main difference is just to and we are talking about Rails 3.0 apps because they have a really different architecture. So in Rails 3, you have this config/application.rb, and there you have definition of class, some module, and class Rails that inherits from Rails application. And from API point of view, it's just a matter of changing this Rails application to Rails engine class, and everything that works in your application will for sure work in engine. But you will probably have to change some things, like for example users. If you have a user model in forum, you'll basically have to remove it and make it so the host application provides that user model. So your dependency is to have application with user model, for example. So it will not be so hard, but you will need some changes.